My daughter's quinceañera was supposed to be the most important night of her 15 years on this earth. We had been saving for 2 years. My husband worked overtime every weekend from January through October. I picked up freelance bookkeeping clients on top of my regular 40-hour week just to make the deposit on the Magnolia Ballroom. Cora had picked out her dress in April, blush pink with hand-sewn beading along the bodice, the kind of dress you only wear once and remember forever. She had been counting down on a paper chain she hung above her bedroom door since the summer. My sister-in-law walked in 40 minutes late with 9 people nobody had ever seen before, sat down at the head table, and told the catering manager to open another bar tab under my name. I found out when the manager pulled me aside between the first and second course and handed me a running total that already had $260 on it from a table I had not authorized. I excused myself from my daughter's quinceañera dinner, walked to the back hallway near the kitchen, and made 3 phone calls. By the time I sat back down next to Cora, everything was already in motion. My sister-in-law had no idea. She was still laughing too loudly at her own jokes and flagging down servers like she owned the venue. I work as a forensic accountant. I spend my days finding money that people thought they had successfully hidden. I reconstruct financial records after fraud, after embezzlement, after the kind of creative bookkeeping that puts people in federal prison. When someone tries to run a tab under my name without my authorization at my daughter's party, I do not panic. I document. My sister-in-law, Renata, is 41 years old and has spent the last decade treating every family event like a personal expense account. She's my husband's older sister. She has the kind of confidence that reads as sophistication until you look closely enough to see it is just aggression with better posture. She drives a leased Range Rover she can barely afford, takes vacations she posts about obsessively, and has never once shown up to a family gathering without asking who was picking up the bill. 2 years ago, she borrowed $3,000 from my husband after his father's funeral. She said it was for the burial costs, that her portion of the estate paperwork had been delayed, and she just needed a bridge loan, 2 weeks maximum, she promised. My husband gave it to her because he was grieving and she was crying, and that is what you do for family. The 2 weeks turned into 6 months. The 6 months turned into her pretending the conversation had never happened, and the $3,000 quietly became a gift we never agreed to give. When I brought it up at Thanksgiving, my mother-in-law told me I was being small about money at the dinner table. My father-in-law looked at his plate. Renata refilled her wine glass and changed the subject to a trip she was planning to Sedona. I learned something important that evening. Renata's behavior had never been corrected because the family had collectively decided that correcting her was more uncomfortable than absorbing the cost. They had been paying her tab in one form or another for years. The bill just rotated around the table. Tonight, it had rotated to me. The Magnolia Ballroom holds 300 people. We had invited 142. I had submitted a final guest count to the venue 6 weeks in advance, the way the contract required. And every single plate, every centerpiece, every chair had been confirmed against that number. There was no room in the budget for 9 additional adults who had apparently been promised a free dinner and an open bar by someone who had no authority to promise either. I had spoken to Renata 3 times in the weeks leading up to the quinceañera. She was on the formal guest list. She had RSVP'd for herself and her husband. That was 2 seats. I had confirmed it in a text message I still had on my phone. What she had done instead was call 9 people I had never met, women from some networking group she was trying to impress, apparently, and told them her family was hosting an exclusive event at one of the city's nicest venues and that everything would be taken care of. She had used my daughter's quinceañera as a venue and a free dinner to perform wealth she did not have for an audience she was trying to cultivate. Cora did not even know some of these people were there. She had been busy taking photos with her court and her grandmother and her best friends since middle school. Nobody had introduced themselves to my daughter. Nobody had brought a card or a gift. They'd come for the party, not for the girl. That was the moment something in me went very still. I found the venue manager, a calm and thorough woman named the manager, in the side corridor near the bridal suite. I had worked with this venue before. My firm had done the corporate event accounting for 2 of their annual galas, so we knew each other professionally. I kept my voice level. I told her exactly what had happened. I showed her the original contract, which I had photographed and saved to my phone, and the text confirmation of Renata's 2-person RSVP. The unauthorized tab was closed immediately. The 9 additional guests were reclassified as walk-ins with no host account to charge against. If they wanted to drink, they could pay per drink at the cash bar in the East Corridor. The catering team would not be bringing additional plates to the head table beyond the contracted count. I went back to my seat. I watched Cora spin across the dance floor with her father for the waltz we had practiced for 6 weeks. I cried a little because she was so beautiful and so happy and completely unaware that anything had happened. My sister-in-law figured it out when the server stopped coming to her end of the table. I watched her flag someone down and get politely redirected. I watched the confusion move across her face. I watched her lean over to one of the women she had brought, a woman in a red blazer who had been filming the venue on her phone since she arrived, and say something that made the woman's expression change. Then Renata stood up and crossed the room toward me. I had been expecting this. I had actually planned for it. The way I plan for the part of an audit when the subject realizes what is happening and decides that aggression is their best remaining option. She sat down in the empty chair next to me and put her hand on my arm with that particular grip that looks affectionate from across the room. She told me there had been a misunderstanding. She told me these were important women, connected women, that one of them ran a boutique event space and could send real business our way. She told me I was making a scene by not being gracious. She told me that family takes care of family and that tonight of all nights, in front of all these people, was not the time to be difficult. I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked at her face. I said, "The contract is for 142 guests. You RSVP'd for 2. Your guests are welcome to purchase drinks at the cash bar." She told me I was being embarrassing. I said, "The bar tab you opened under my account has been closed. If there is a charge that goes through after tonight, I will dispute it and I will provide documentation." She told me I was making this into something it wasn't. I said, "I hope your friends enjoy the rest of the evening." Then, I turned back toward the dance floor where my daughter was laughing at something her cousin had said, and I did not look at Renata again. What happened next at her end of the table, I heard about later from my husband's cousin, who had a clear sight line to the whole thing. The 9 women Renata had brought began to realize, slowly, and then all at once, that the situation was not what they had been told. The server confirmed politely that there was no host account for their drinks. The dinner plates that came out were for the contracted guests only. The table they were sitting at had been set for 6 family members, and 4 of Renata's guests had pulled up chairs from a nearby cocktail table, which meant they were sitting without proper place settings. The woman in the red blazer, the one who had been filming everything, stopped filming. Renata tried to cover. She pulled out her own card and told the server to start a tab. The server ran it. It came back declined. She tried a second card. The woman in the red blazer watched this happen. She did not say anything dramatic. She simply picked up her clutch, said something quietly to the woman next to her, and the 2 of them stood up and left. Not rudely, just cleanly, the way people leave when they have understood that they were misled and do not intend to compound the mistake by staying. 3 more of Renata's guests followed within 10 minutes. The remaining 4 stayed through dessert, though the conversation at that end of the table had become visibly strained. After the cake, after Cora's last waltz, after the bouquet toss and the final photos, I was standing near the gift table talking to my aunt when my mother-in-law appeared at my elbow. She told me what I had done was cold. She told me Renata was going through a hard time financially, which I already knew, and that I had humiliated her in front of people she was trying to build a relationship with. She said that a woman with my income could have absorbed the cost and chosen kindness. She said that she hoped I understood what kind of message this sent to the family. I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "Renata told 9 people that my daughter's quinceañera was a free event she was hosting. Not one of those 9 people introduced themselves to Cora. Not one of them brought a gift or a card. My daughter is 15 years old and it was her night. I protected it. My mother-in-law started to say something else. I said, I'm going to go dance with my daughter now. And I did. The story should have ended there at the ballroom, with the string lights dimming and Cora asleep in the back seat of the car still wearing her crown. But there is a particular kind of person who interprets your refusal to absorb their consequences as an act of war, and Renata was that kind of person. She called my husband 11 times between midnight and 2 in the morning. He did not answer. In the morning, she drove to our house and rang the doorbell at 7:45 while we were still asleep. My husband went downstairs in his robe. I stayed at the top of the stairs and listened. She told him I had sabotaged her. She told him she had been building a business connection with those women and I had destroyed it. She told him the bar tab was a misunderstanding and I had overreacted. She told him she needed him to talk to me, to make me understand that family means you give people the benefit of the doubt. My husband was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You put 9 strangers at our daughter's head table and tried to charge it to our account without asking. Cora didn't know those women. They didn't speak to her. That was her night, not yours." Renata told him I had turned him against her. He said, "I'm going back to bed. We'll talk when you've had time to think." He came upstairs and got back into bed and put his arm around me and we both lay there in the quiet for a little while. We thought it was done. It was not done. What we did not know, what we found out 4 days later from my husband's cousin, was that Renata had been telling people in the family group chat that I had deliberately had her escorted out of the Quinceañera. This was not true. Nobody had escorted her anywhere. She had stayed through dessert and left on her own. But the version she was telling positioned her as the victim of a public humiliation orchestrated by a controlling, vindictive sister-in-law who had always had it out for her. Several family members had sent her supportive messages. 2 of them sent me pointed messages asking why I had treated her that way at a family event. I did not respond to any of them immediately. I opened a document on my laptop and I typed out a factual, time-stamped account of what had actually happened. The RSVP confirmation, the unauthorized fab, the contract terms, the number of uninvited guests, the cards and gifts that had not come from those guests for my daughter. I attached screenshots of the texts. I attached the RSVP confirmation email. I saved it. Then I sent it without commentary to the family members who had messaged me. I did not say Renata was lying. I did not call her names. I presented the documentation the same way I present documentation at work. Because I am a forensic accountant and a paper trail is a paper trail whether you are in a boardroom or a family group chat. The responses stopped. What happened over the following week settled itself the way these things eventually do, when the truth is documented and the noise has nowhere to go. The women from the networking group did not pursue any further relationship with Renata. The red blazer woman had apparently posted something vague but pointed on a local business owners forum about being misled to an event under false pretenses, which I did not share or amplify but which reached the people it was going to reach regardless. My mother-in-law called me 3 weeks later. She did not apologize exactly. She said she thought I could have handled it differently. I said I thought so too, and I still would have handled it the same way. She said that Renata was struggling. I said I knew, and that I had a lot of compassion for someone who was struggling, and that compassion did not require me to hand my daughter's quinceañera to a stranger's ambitions. There was a long silence. She said she supposed she understood. I told her I appreciated that. It is a different kind of family now than it was a year ago. There are things that have shifted and will not shift back. Renata and I are not close and we are not going to be. She has not acknowledged what happened to me or to my daughter directly, and I do not expect her to. The relationship is cordial and bounded, and I have made my peace with that description. What I have not made peace with is pretending it was fine, because it was not fine, and the reason it escalated as far as it did is that nobody in that family had ever let it not be fine before. Every prior version of this situation had been absorbed. Every uncomfortable bill had been quietly split. Every boundary had eventually bent because bending felt like kindness and holding felt like cruelty. But here is what I actually know. From years of watching what happens when financial dishonesty goes unchallenged, the cost does not disappear. It just moves. Someone else carries it, and the person doing the moving gets better and better at moving it because nothing has ever made them stop. Cora's quinceañera budget was $4,200, which my husband and I had saved over 24 months. We came in under budget by $60 because I'd negotiated the linens. The week after the party, I transferred $300 into a savings account I opened in Cora's name as a starting point for whatever she wants to build toward: a car, college, a first apartment deposit, whatever matters to her when the time comes. I told her it was a birthday gift from the party that went exactly the way it was supposed to go. She asked me what I meant by that. I told her that sometimes the best thing that happens at a celebration is that the people who love you show up for you, and the people who were never really there for you to begin with make that clear on their own. She thought about that for a second. Then she said, like Aunt Renata's friends who didn't even say happy birthday to me. I said, exactly like that. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to the leftover cake. I have thought a lot since then about what I would tell someone sitting where I was sitting 2 years ago, when Renata first borrowed that $3,000 and I had the instinct that it was not a loan, and I pushed the instinct down because pushing it down felt like the generous thing to do. The first thing is this: a pattern is a pattern the first time it happens. You do not need 3 incidents to confirm it. Your gut recognized it as a pattern immediately, and you talked yourself out of trusting your gut because you wanted to believe the most charitable version of the story. That is a human thing to do. It is also how the pattern continues. The second thing, documentation is not aggression. Writing down what was said, saving the text, keeping the contract, noting the date and time, none of that is hostile. It is just clarity. People who have been operating in the gray area of family generosity for a long time will tell you that documentation is a sign of distrust, that it is cold, that it is not what family does. That framing benefits them, not you. Clarity benefits everyone who is operating honestly. The third thing, and this is the one I come back to the most, protecting something is not the same as withholding it. I did not take anything from Renata that night. I declined to give her something that was not hers to take. Those are different actions, even when someone is determined to describe them as the same. My daughter's quinceañera was her night. I kept it that way. That was the whole job, and I did it. If you are in a family where someone has been treating your generosity as a resource they are entitled to draw from without asking, I want you to know that the moment you decide to stop absorbing the cost, it is going to feel like you are doing something wrong. The discomfort is real. The guilt is real. But you are not doing something wrong. You are just doing something new. And the family system, which has been calibrated around your willingness to absorb, is going to register the change as a disruption. That disruption is not evidence that you made the wrong choice. It is evidence that you made a different one. Have you ever had to hold a line for your child at a family event and felt the whole room turn on you for it? Have you ever been the one who finally said no and watched everyone act like you were the problem? Tell me in the comments, because I know I am not the only one who has stood in that hallway and had to decide. If this story resonated with you, subscribe. I am here every week with another true account of what it actually looks like to stop letting people run a tab in your name. The account is closed, the records are clean, and my daughter's crown is still hanging above her bedroom door. I have thought about Renata a lot since that night, and not in the way I expected to. I don't think about the bar tab or the 9 strangers at my daughter's table or the card that declined twice in front of the woman in the red blazer. I think about the moment at Thanksgiving 2 years earlier when I sat at that dinner table and watched the family look at their plates while I raised the question of the $3,000. And I decided the discomfort of the room was more important than the truth I was sitting with. That decision cost me 2 more years of the same pattern. That's the part I keep turning over. There is something I now understand about how situations like this sustain themselves over time. It is not that the person doing the taking is unusually powerful. Renata is not powerful. She is someone who learned, through years of small tests, exactly how much the people around her would absorb before they said anything. Every time the bill got quietly split, every time someone changed the subject at Thanksgiving, every time I paid for something I hadn't agreed to pay for and told myself it was the generous choice, each of those moments was information she was collecting. The message it sent was, "This is available. Keep going." I don't say that to assign blame evenly. What Renata did was her choice, and she owns the consequences of it. But I think about my own role in the system that allowed it to run for as long as it did, and I can trace it back to one thing. I kept mistaking silence for grace. They are not the same. Grace is something you extend from a position of clarity. Silence is often just avoidance wearing Grace's clothes. Cora asked me once, not long after the Quinceañera, why I hadn't just paid for it and avoided the whole thing. She's 15 and practical, and she wanted to understand the math of it. I told her that the math was never the point. The point was that 9 people sat at her table on her night, and not one of them said happy birthday to her. And if I had paid for their drinks and their dinner and said nothing, the lesson she would have taken from watching me do that is that the way you keep peace in a family is by making yourself smaller than the people who are taking up your space. That is not the lesson I want my daughter to carry into her adult life. I want her to understand that ethics is not about being agreeable. It's about being honest with other people and with yourself. I want her to understand that intelligence without the willingness to act on what you know is just sophisticated paralysis. And I want her to understand that the kind of strength that actually protects people you love is usually quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just holds the line and lets the other person make their own choices about what happens next. Renata made her choices. The women she was trying to impress saw exactly what they needed to see. The documentation I sent to the family members who questioned me said what it needed to say without me raising my voice once. The account is closed and the record is clean. And every time I look at the crown hanging above Cora's bedroom door, I know the night belonged to her fully, the way it was supposed to. That is enough. That has always been enough.